All right. So, hi, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, evening. I am here today to talk a little bit about this mankind man cave. That's a mouthful. Men's group, mankind man cave men's group that I am going to be launching next week. I know that there might not be a lot of familiarity with men's groups, so I just thought I would talk a little bit about why I like them, why I think they're worthwhile, and my experience of them, as well as getting into a little bit of some of the topics that we're going to talk about and why I think uh, these are really some of the most important topics. The first version of this group that I wrote out and kind of vomited onto a page was like, I think it was 18 sessions, and then I got it down to 12 sessions. I was like, okay, that's it. This is like, it's got to be 12 sessions. I was like, no, it needs to be a little shorter. So I made it down to 6 sessions, and I feel like I really managed to capture what I think is kind of the most essential pieces here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. But first off, why a men's group? Well, I think a couple reasons. Number one, I love men's groups. I've been running men's groups now since 2016, so almost 5 years. And I didn't think that I would be that big of a fan of them the first time I did it. I was, number one, terrified that I would get in there and nobody would say anything, that it would just be silence and crickets, and I'd be asking questions, and nobody would want to share. Nobody would really want to be there. And I've had, over the years, a couple sessions here or there that could be a little quiet. And at the same time, I think something that we learn pretty quickly is that these spaces, in some ways, can actually be really freeing. That it's not so much like, a lot of people have this concept of like, oh, well, I'm just going to like go to a group that's just a group full of strangers I've never met before, and I'm supposed to talk about my private stuff and my feelings and be vulnerable. That feels terrifying. These are just strangers. And I get that. And at the same time, they're strangers. They don't know you. They don't know your sister, your mother in law, your aunt. They don't know anything about your life. So if there was, I mean, honestly, the same thing is true with a therapist. If there was anybody in the world that you could like kind of open up to and say the stuff that you wouldn't say to other people in your life, it's a group of strangers. The other thing is that in my experience, the sense of being total strangers in it being like, I can't trust you, this is dangerous, I don't know if I can open up, doesn't last that long. Usually it just takes, honestly, one person kind of being willing to take that first step. Sometimes that's me. And just share something that's a little vulnerable, share something that's a little tough. And that kind of starts to clue everybody in like, oh, okay, this is a place where I can say something like that, or I mean, for that matter, where I can like experience a hard emotion, whether it be anger or sadness, or somebody starts tearing up as they talk about something difficult, and all of a sudden it kind of feels like it's a safer space to get into some of those topics, and you can really start to feel the change in those groups when all of a sudden that door gets opened and it feels like, oh, okay, we can do this. We can talk about some of these things. Um, and I think that's kind of the essence of what I love about men's groups so much. Number one, they're accessible, especially when it comes to price, but also when it comes to, I guess, kind of the time limited nature of it. This group that I put together is 6 weeks long, and we get into some topics, but in some ways it's kind of like a therapy boot camp. It's not gonna get you to a space where all of your issues are handled. Not that we ever really get to a space where all of our issues are handled, but it's not going to be the equivalent of a year of therapy, but it's going to equip you with, number one, some skills and tools that are just like practical stuff that you can start implementing immediately. Number two, it will start you on the process of asking some questions and doing a little bit of that inner exploration. That's like, okay, I don't maybe need to be in therapy for all of this. Maybe there are some pieces that I can, you know, get prompted by this group and kind of start the wheels turning, and then do a little bit of the processing, maybe a little bit of journaling on my own. And then maybe I go to therapy or, seek out some more support when I get stuck or when I hit a space where it feels like I'm losing momentum. But, I'm not a believer that everybody has to be in therapy to have growth in their lives. That's what There are so many different ways to get help, whether it be talking to a friend or family member, a coach, doing self help books. I mean, there are so many different. Okay, I think it just paused. That's weird. I was checking to see if I was running out of battery because my phone was low a little bit ago. Anyway, yeah, there are so many different ways to kind of go on that process of individual exploration and recognizing like this is a problem and something needs to change. And I think that this is just as valid of a place to start as anywhere else. And it can be a little bit more affordable, a little bit more time limited. There's not this sense of like, oh, well, once I start, I don't know if I'll be able to stop or if we'll get into things that will really need to have a whole lot of exploration. It tends to be pretty contained. That said, I think one of the hopes is that I can teach you some tools and ask some questions that will kind of have you doing a little bit more exploration on your own. That's one of the reasons that I give journal prompts. One of the reasons that I have meditations as a part of this is because I think that mindfulness and that individual awareness of our thoughts, our emotions, and our beliefs are basically the building blocks of creating real change on our own or in a therapy relationship, either way. And not only that, but the relationship. And I think this is something that kind of gets downplayed a little bit because I think in some ways we can be hesitant to want to go into a group where it feels like, oh, well, I'll have to be vulnerable and then like I have to like be friends with these guys. And I will tell you, in my experience, usually there are some pretty good relationships that get formed in these sorts of groups. And you don't have to do anything. The way that you engage in these relationships with other men is entirely up to you. That includes during the group and after the group. So just having a little bit of ease in that sense of there's no expectations of what that looks like, but you get to show up and engage with these topics and engage with these men and hear what they have to say and learn from them and also share and have them learn from you. And most of the time, the issues that we're getting into are common issues. It's not just something that one guy says like, oh, well, I experienced this, and everyone's like, never had that happen. Freaking weirdo. Yeesh. Glad I'm not him. That doesn't happen. I don't think I've ever had that happen. It's we do have common issues, and I think it's important to kind of hit on those especially. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the topics we get into, some of those common issues. So first session, it's a little bit of a meet and greet, but also we jump pretty quickly into content, starting with what I call male messages. Now, these are essentially the messages that we receive as men growing up. These are the conditions or expectations that are put on us and also that we put on ourselves in terms of what it means to be a good man. Things like men don't cry, things like men have a lot of sex or are good with the ladies or men. Things like, well, and traditionally it would be ladies, but we're not going to get into exclusionary sort of topics in this group. We're going to do our best to be inclusive as much as we can. And also, it is an inevitable aspect of this topic thinking about like the traditional messages of men that, yeah, it is pretty heteronormative. Men make and have a lot of money. Men are independent. These sorts of topics that are not inherently bad, but can also kind of have a pretty big influence on our life and our priorities and the way that we live, can have good and bad impacts. And so, really, just the first session, a good portion of it is just digging into some of these messages, how they've impacted us, which ones have helped us, which ones have hurt us, where we learn these messages, that sort of thing, as well as an introduction to meditation and mindfulness. Like I said, I really consider mindfulness as being one of the biggest tools that we have for making change in our lives. And I think we can figure out ways to implement that into sort of daily living. And also, if we have a meditation practice, even if it's not every day, that is always going to be strengthening that muscle. Outside of that, other topics that we get into, getting into what I call emotional literacy, but just kind of gaining some more familiarity with emotions, which is something that as men, a lot of times we really don't have. And one of the most valuable tools here is really learning pretty basic, straightforward skills and tools for managing overwhelming emotions, managing emotions like anger, like anxiety, like managing stress, and figuring out both how to stop ourselves from getting to that place where we're overwhelmed, and then also, even once we're overwhelmed, ways to kind of edge our way back so it doesn't peak into some sort of massive outburst or something that ends up having a lot of consequences for us, for our relationships, for our loved ones, that sort of thing. Topic 3 is trust and communication. And this inevitably gets into a little bit of relationship dynamics. Is kind of build trust, how we don't build trust, how trust is broken, when it's smart to trust other people and give them another chance, and when it's really best for us to just protect ourselves. Also, some pretty basic skills around communication, how to improve our communication. We talk a little bit about pros and cons of vulnerability, about shame and the way that that has impacted our lives, the way that that impacts our self-concept and the way that we engage in relationships, and also go into ways to kind of navigate that emotion of shame, the pros and cons of it, the way that we can try and work to process through it. And then finally, we've got our last two groups, which are self-worth and gratitude, talking about kind of coming back to some of those conditions of worth, exploring ways that we assess our self-worth, ways that we might tear ourselves down, and ways that gratitude can be helpful. Also, a little bit about ways that gratitude can end up feeling like it minimizes our individual experience, because I know I've certainly experienced that. Like, oh, just be grateful and you'll be fine, and how to actually help that be useful. And then last one is intimacy, sex, and building healthy relationships, as well as a little bit of a closing ritual. So exploring how do we define intimacy? How do we show intimacy? What are harmful and helpful patterns in our relationship? And how do we communicate our love? And how do we like to receive love from someone else? Just getting into all of those different questions. That actually brings up one other thing. Your average session, so just to kind of give a framework for it, we start by just kind of listing some goals and intentions for the group. Then we do have some discussion questions. A large portion of the session is just kind of throwing out some questions and exploring them. Occasionally, there will be some psychoeducation here or there where I'm teaching tools, teaching skills, providing information on research that's been done on any particular topic. And then there's usually some sort of an exercise. Maybe that's a little bit of a writing exercise. Maybe it is an exercise on practicing a tool that maybe we learned earlier in the session. Finally, finishing up with a meditation, usually just a handful of minutes. So if you hear meditation, you're like, no, not 15 minutes of sitting in silence. It's not that long, most of the time. And then giving some tools for what to do in the next week. And that's going to be the meditation. Some journaling prompts. So those are the tools that you can take home, the ways that you can start to make a change in your daily life. Because 1.5 hours a week is great, and if that's the only time you're spending on yourself, the only time you're spending exploring these topics, you're probably not going to get as much from it as if you're taking time to journal and kind of explore and think through each of these topics every day. So I always want to make sure that you're getting the most for your money, and that is one of the ways that I'm really trying to help you have the opportunity and ability to integrate this stuff. Not just listen, not just hear, not just know, but integrate these practices into your life. I am so excited for this group. It starts this Monday. So that is April 5th and runs 6 weeks, 8 men in this group. We are limiting it so that we make sure that everybody has time to talk, has time to really express what's going on in their lives and the way that these topics have emerged and continue to be experienced in their day-to-day experience in life. And yeah, I honestly can't wait. I'm really looking forward to meeting with a good group of men who are ready to do some of this work and kind of dig in. And if there's a little bit of hesitancy, if there's a little bit of gun shyness, that's okay too. I think that's a part of this process, that we tend to get into some spaces that are uncomfortable, and so inherently there's going to be a little bit of edginess to it. Anyway, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'll be posting some more information. I did post the session summaries on my Instagram today, so you can see those if you missed part of this, or if you just want to review them without having to listen to me chat at you for 10 minutes. And if you are looking to register your spot and reserve your spot, just reach out. Basically, we just need to do a brief conversation to make sure that we're on the same page for what you're looking for and what I can offer, making sure that if there's any issues that you require more support on, that we can make sure that we're doing that, whether that's through getting support elsewhere in your life or what have you. And then we'll get started on the Monday. All right, thanks.